on is that, well, it's only women, and it's only women who have had kids.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not a woman who's had kids, it's not going to happen to you. But that's certainly a misconception, right?
Absolutely. It's happened to me. I never had children. I'm not postmenopausal, but I was a high impact athlete. I did gymnastics, and during that point in time, there's a big hormone shift, so I guess that could be kind of relatable to menopause. But it happens very commonly for young female athletes, especially if you now extend into the female triad, which is amenorrhea or irregular menstruation, probably have some level of an eating disorder, and osteopenia, which is basically the thinning of your bones. So I more or less kind of had all of those things. There was a lot of pressure from our coaches and amongst other young females who were going through a lot of body image changes at the time. And being in a high impact sport, like gymnastics, it could be dance, it could be volleyball, basketball, those sorts of sports just make you more susceptible to it. And so, yeah, I had it and didn't realize until PT school and started learning about all this stuff. I was like, interesting. It's not just me.
Right.
Which is a big common thing. And no, it's not just you. And no, you don't have to just live with it. You can treat it.
And it can affect men as well.
Absolutely. So most commonly, it's going to happen in men who've had prostate cancer treatments, because the prostate more or less acts as a bra for the bladder. So just anatomically, the tetris in their body provides more support to the bladder than it does in females, because we don't have a prostate.
Got it. Okay. Well, okay. So now we're getting into a little bit of anatomy. So can you dive a little deeper into explaining like what are the anatomical structures that are involved and what is potentially the problem?
Yeah. So more or less, we kind of start with the fact that the pelvic floor muscles are the exact same kind of muscles in your bicep. They're skeletal muscle. And then as far as structurally, in a man or a woman's pelvis, you're going to have your bony ring that has attachments in the front at your pubic symphysis, and then in the back at the SI joint. At the outlet of that bowl is going to be the muscular hammock that makes up your pelvic floor that has 3 layers. It's termed your pelvic floor as though it's one muscle, but there are a lot of muscles that create that muscular hammock, and there's 3 layers to them. The outer layers are the ones that are most responsible for maintaining closure at our sphincters, or the outlets. So your urethra, the vagina for women, and then the anus for men. In conjunction with this 3 layers of muscles, there's a large fascial network. It's the fascia that is what's most susceptible to change in that stretch quota over time.
Can you describe fascia? I think there's some misunderstanding about what fascia is.
Yeah. So fascia is a type of connective tissue that is ubiquitous throughout our body. In more of the leading research now, they categorize it into 4 different types of fascia. There's fascia that creates the barrier between our skin and our muscles. There is myofascia, which people are most familiar with. That's what's going to compartmentalize our muscles into the nice little tetris that's within our body. We also have fascia that surrounds our organ system as well as our nervous system. This fascia, as it pertains to the pelvic floor, we think organ fascia or visceral fascia, the type of fascia that is going to compartmentalize our bladder, our organ, our intestines, the uterus, the gonads, all of those sort of things in the abdominal cavity. And if we're thinking about pregnancy and delivery, the changes in that fascia that compartmentalizes the organs, as well as the myofascia that is going to create attachments and compartmentalize the pelvic floor muscular hammock to the bony attachments surrounding it in that pelvic ring.
Okay. So P when I jump, what's the anatomically what's happening there? Like, why is that happening?
So
I guess I understand that this is multifactorial. There's lots of things that could potentially happen. What's the most common reason that that's happening? Mechanically, I guess.
Mechanically. The most common reason that's happening comes back to the balance of pressure and tension. Most commonly, it's going to be improper breath control. So if you're breath holding, more or less you're squeezing from the top, pushing down. You can have good muscular control as far as strength and endurance, but if the pressure above is greater than the pressure below, then you're going to have an imbalance and therefore a leak. It could also come from the inadequate tension below, which can be from a fascial standpoint, that the structure of the muscles and their attachment to the bone and to the bony ring around it is not adequate, or the muscular strength and endurance is not adequate. And so part of the evaluation that I do is trying to identify which is the greater culprit. Is it coming from the excess pressure above, or is it coming from inadequate tension below, or do we have a combination of the two that we then have to address both of them?
Got it. So I think this is an interesting point too, that your pelvic floor function is associated with and is certainly connected to like core strength. People talk about midline stabilization, core strength. Part of that is your pelvic floor.
Yep.
Right?
Absolutely.
And so I think there's some people that think, well, I have a strong core, like I can deadlift a lot of weight, I can do lots of different activities, I can hold a plank or whatever. And so there's this thought like, well, if I'm strong, then why is my pelvic floor weak? Or even, further digress from that, like, well, I have a six pack.
Yeah.
So my pelvic floor should be good. I mean, they're related, but those two things are just like correlates. They're not just because you have a big deadlift and a strong back doesn't mean you can have those things and still have a weak pelvic floor that's causing this issue.
Yeah. So a big educational point is that core is kind of a buzzword, and that core in the media or sometimes core in the gym is different than the core that I talk about. The core that I talk about is a synergy between your respiratory diaphragm above, or your breathing diaphragm. It's yin and yang below, which is the pelvic diaphragm or your pelvic floor. And then a group of muscles that surround your midsection called I'm going to abbreviate it, called your TA. And then the multifidi, which are teeny tiny muscles that span your vertebrae in the back. I like talking about these two as a corset, so if you can visualize that corset around your midsection and the lacing of the corset up the back, that's the relationship between your TA and your multifidi. Those groups of muscles need to be able to work in synergy together, meaning the timing and then the amplitude of force that they create to regulate pressure in your abdominal cavity. And if that timing and that coordination is off, then that's where you can get the excess pressure above or the inadequate tension below, or a combination of the two. So we do a lot of core retraining, which is focused on the coordination and timing of recruiting these muscles together at a very low level. Basically, you got to teach people how to crawl before they can cartwheel. And so the stuff that we do, I kind of joke, I know this is super boring. It's not the frills of doing a side plank with one leg up, but if you can't find and feel these muscles in the very basic activities, you're not going to be able to use them when you're trying to do a 180-pound split jerk. Yeah. It's just not going to happen because our bodies are going to default to the easiest way to get it done. You've been doing it your way for 30 plus years. Your body's going to default to that movement pattern. And so I more or less say that we're recoding, we're writing new code for your body to use more efficiently while you're doing a higher level skill. Yeah,
I think, when we think about the muscular anatomy, and you kind of almost in real simple terms, when you look at, let's say you look at a bodybuilder, what you're seeing is the big superficial muscles. What you're not seeing is the small, deep muscles that are really involved in control.
Yeah.
And it's really easy, especially for a new athlete, it's kind of easy for anyone to bypass those small muscles and make the big muscles do the job.
Yeah.
That will last for so long.
Correct.
And then when those big muscles fatigue, you've got no network to help support you, right? And so that's why we see, it's the same reason we see overuse injuries of the shoulder, of the knee, of whatever. Sometimes people are relying so much on the big muscles and haven't spent any time doing the work for the small muscles that these problems creep in. So it kind of sounds like you're saying the same thing with the pelvic floor and just core strength in general.
Yep, absolutely.